fellow Trek Chatters. I'm Pit Trekkie, and welcome to another episode of Pittsburgh's Trek Chat. So today's episode is going to focus on a special, tiny little anniversary that happened in the Star Trek world just within the last week or so. Can you believe it's the 30th anniversary of Star Trek The Next Generation already? 30 years! I can't believe how fast time has gone. I remember being that 6-year-old little boy watching that show for the very first time and learning about the Enterprise and learning about what Star Trek's all about. Little did I realize how much that would still impact me 30 years later. I'm a big fan of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's my favorite of all the series. The Enterprise D is my favorite of the ships, of the Enterprises. So what I'd like to do in this episode is just kind of go over some what I thought were important moments of Star Trek The Next Generation during its 7-season run, and also maybe just talk about some of my personal memories from the different times I was watching this show. The show was on the air from when I was in 1st grade through 7th grade. So I actually, not only did I enjoy my childhood years with Star Trek The Next Generation, but I became an adolescent with The Next Generation. It kind of ended at the beginning of my adolescence. Definitely was very hard when that show went off the air. It was very difficult. But of course, you know, I still get to enjoy it in reruns, and then the movies that came after that. I know not every Trek fan loves the Star Trek The Next Generation movies, but I love them. I think they're wonderful. Probably going to shock a few people by saying, but Star Trek Nemesis is actually my favorite of the Next Generation movies. Yes, I said Star Trek Nemesis is my favorite of the Next Generation movies. So let the hate begin underneath here. All right. So what we're going to talk about first are my favorite moments from the Next Generation. One of my all-time favorite moments is from Encounter at Farpoint, the pilot. I love when Admiral McCoy is walking in the corridor with Data, and they're talking about the Vulcans and, you know, androids being like Vulcans. But when he was talking to Data about how the Enterprise has its right name, you know, that I still choke up at that point. When he says, "You treat her like a lady, and she'll always bring you home," always choke up. I just did a couple days ago when I rewatched the episode. It's just a very beautiful moment, passing of the torch moment. So that's something that I always will cherish and remember from that episode. Another major moment that was big for the Next Generation was when Tasha Yar was killed off. You know, it was the very first time in Star Trek history that they actually killed off a main character and didn't bring them back to life. You know, so watching her die, that was very shocking. And even to this day, when I watch Skin of Evil, and I just watched it about 3 weeks ago, still just feel very heavy. It's such an intense, emotional episode. And I go on an emotional roller coaster every time I watch Tasha die and watch the crew reacting to that death, and then the death scene at the end, the funeral. You know, very emotional episode. Another moment from Skin of Evil that I really like and is shocking to me is Data. When Data's talking to Armis and Armis is threatening to have Data kill other crew members and then finally kill himself. And Data makes the comment, "No redeemable qualities." And Data says to Armis, "I think you should be destroyed." I just think that that's a very shocking moment. It's stunning to me even when I hear it. To think of Data saying that to another life form, that he felt another life form should be destroyed. So, you know, if that pushed Data to that point, you know, it was a pretty intense moment. So I always enjoy watching that episode. Just kind of I like the emotional roller coaster I get on from that episode. My absolute all-time favorite Star Trek The Next Generation episode, The Best of Both Worlds, Part 1. Absolutely love that episode. I actually still have it recorded from back in 1990 when it was aired as a very brand new episode. It's actually the oldest episode that I have taped out of all Star Trek. But I remember about watching the show, what I thought was really interesting. First of all, I love the battles. I love the parts where Picard's going through the ship, he's in the nebula, he's talking to Guinan about how this isn't going to be the end. I just love the action scenes when he's abducted, and then when you see him come out actually in that Locutus outfit, it's hard to believe. You know, it's very shocking because you didn't expect it, you know, and I was, 9 at the time, so like it was stunning for me to see. What I remember mostly about that episode was the very end when Riker said, "Fire." When he did that, I remember reading it said "to be continued," and I was watching it with my dad and my brothers, and I remember saying, "Dad, are they going to have this on next week? And he goes, no, you're going to have to wait all summer until in the fall when it comes back. That was my very first introduction to a cliffhanger. And believe me, I was not happy when I knew I had to wait 3-4 months. But it was worth it in the end a few months later to see part 2. But part 1 was just amazing. The drama and the tension and then the fighting with Riker and Shelby. It was just a really, really awesome episode. Another thing that I really liked about Next Generation was when the 6th season was going on and Deep Space Nine was added to the mix. I loved that in the last 2 seasons they were able to do crossovers with Deep Space Nine. You had the episode Birthright Part 1. The ship actually stopped at Deep Space Nine. You actually got to see Worf on the promenade pre his time on DS9, which is really cool. And you also see Dr. Bashir interacting with Data. So that was really neat to be able to see that. I loved when they would cross over. Then a year later in the 7th season, I believe Rightful Heir was the name of the episode, when they were looking for the Duras sisters, and Riker actually spoke to Quark on the view screen. So that was a neat little crossover as well. Loved both casts, so seeing them together interacting to some degree was really nice. Also, the finale, there was those big questions. What's going to happen at the end? I didn't really think anybody was going to die, because we knew that in a few months Star Trek Generations would be coming out. But I was very curious at the time. How are they going to end this show? What kind of episode is it going to be? And boy, was all good things quite a well-written, thought-provoking episode when they talk about the paradoxes and the anti-time. Just really get you thinking, and it's just amazing that there were writers that were able to come up with that level of creativity for an episode. And Next Generation ended beautifully, especially that final shot of the Enterprise flying away toward that nebula or whatever. Still gets me right here. So now going from favorite moments to favorite memories that I had watching The Next Generation. One moment for a drink. The episode from the first season, 11001001. My twin brother and I were very excited to see this episode. And part of what attracted us to Star Trek when we were 6 years old is the thought, oh, the Enterprise was destroyed. Oh, there's a new Enterprise now. So we thought the Enterprise D was going to be destroyed. And we were like, oh, gung-ho, the Enterprise is going to be destroyed. The Enterprise is going to be destroyed. You know, so that really made us want to watch the episode. And then when they turned off the self-destruct near the end of the episode, we were a little bummed. To be honest with you, I'm glad they didn't destroy the Enterprise D that early. You know, it worked a lot better in Generations than it would have a few months into the first season of the show. But that was something we were really interested in. And we used to reenact it too, the self-destruct thing. Another favorite memory was the night yesterday's Enterprise came out. I remember we were in the store and we were with Mom and we were telling everybody, Star Trek's on tonight, Tasha Yar is coming back. We were really excited. At the time, Tasha Yar was my absolute favorite character of the show. It's grown to where I love all the cast members equally, but at the time, Tasha was still my favorite. I was so glad and so excited she was coming back, and I couldn't wait to see how they were going to do it. What I do remember is, and of course it would have been our luck, at the end of the episode, right as Tasha's sitting down at the tactical station on the Enterprise C, the network, or the station went to static. So you could see the picture, but you couldn't hear anything until near the part where Geordi's evacuating engineering. So we missed that piece for a period of time. That was frustrating as all get out. I actually still have that. I think that might be taped still too. I can't remember. Maybe I do. But that was a very interesting night. Again, the best of both worlds cliffhanger. Like I told you, I first learned about cliffhangers. That was really something. I still hate cliffhangers to this day. I hate having to wait all summer. I'm sure many of you do too. Then a year later, between season 4 and 5, in the 4th season finale, Redemption, when Sela shows up, I remember watching that and just being stunned. Remember, I was a big Tasha Yar fan when I was really young, and I remember like thinking, what in the heck, how is she back? Is she still alive? Did they resurrect her? You know, how did they get Tasha back? And I couldn't wait for the next week because we had missed it in its original airing. So we watched it the repeat of the finale before the season premiere came on a week later. And I remember going into the bathtub and I'm trying to wash my hair and do all this stuff, but I could not get that episode out of my mind. And I was actually talking to myself the entire time saying, you know, what's this episode going to be like? How's Tasha coming back? I just can't wait for this. So that excitement, you know, is something that I really enjoy. And it's still something I feel to this day about Star Trek in general. Also, what I loved about the 5th season was the Star Trek 6 stuff coming out, and then Unification Part 1 and 2 coming out, where Spock actually came on to the show. That was just such a neat time, being able to have the two generations kind of that linked together. It makes me, every Christmas I still think about the 5th season of The Next Generation and Star Trek 6. A lot of times I'll even watch Star Trek 6 around that time just because it brings back good memories. Also, one of my favorite moments from The Next Generation, kind of what I said earlier, but Deep Space Nine premiering. What's actually very interesting is when Deep Space Nine premiered, I didn't call it this at the time, but really it became Star Trek Saturday nights, because at 6 o'clock The Next Generation would air, and then 7 o'clock Deep Space Nine would air. And to be honest with you, we were more excited about the new Deep Space Nine episodes premiering than we were about the Next Generation episodes coming on. Not that we liked DS9 better or anything like that, but it was just Deep Space Nine was new, and Deep Space Nine was the very first Star Trek show we started watching from the get-go where we could remember it. Whereas Next Gen, even though we watched it from the beginning, I don't remember a whole lot of watching all the episodes because I was so little. And my brother feels the same way. So that was always something to look forward to. And to this day, I still miss Star Trek Saturday nights. I do. I was even thinking about it yesterday. The other last real thing about The Next Generation that I really love, the memories, the action figures. In 1992, when those Playmates action figures came out, that was amazing. I remember Mom actually bought all of them when they first came out. And she hid them in our shed. Because we kept asking about them. And I finally bribed her by saying I would pay her money if I could open up one of the action figures. And that first action figure turned out to be Data, which I still have in my curio cabinet down in my Trekkie man cave. Love those figures. I still, to this day, think that they're the best Star Trek action figures ever made. Even though Art Asylum has those really nice, real detailed ones, I can't get past the original Playmates ones. They're very special to me, and they always will be. All right. So next I want to move on to talk about, why does Star Trek The Next Generation still endure 30 years later? You know, what is it about that show that people still love? I think it's the excellent cast of characters. I think Captain Picard, Commander Riker, all the way down are very well written. You can tell how much the characters care about each other, and I think that really comes full throttle in Star Trek Nemesis during the wedding scene. You can see kind of how close they've all become. And you can also notice it with the cast as well. I mean, you can tell how much fun they had on the show. They tell you how much fun they had on the show, and you can see how much fun they have with each other. To this day, you know, I've seen them, the cast in Las Vegas. I've seen them at smaller conventions like Steel City Con here in Pittsburgh, and they really genuinely love each other and are a family. And I love that. My favorite crew, deep down, they love each other in real life, and I love that. The stories, if you think about it, many of them are still relevant. Consider Symbiosis from the first season, dealing with drug addiction. Look at how drug addiction is still in this day. Even in Pittsburgh, we're having a big opioid crisis epidemic going on right now, you know. So those issues that were in that episode about addiction and people selling drugs, I mean, that's still very relevant 30 years later. Third season episode, The High Ground, terrorism. Look at the increase of terrorism we've had in the last 30 years. I mean, look at everything going on with ISIS, and we had everything with Al-Qaeda and 9/11 and the Taliban. I mean, it's no matter where you turn and look at your news, whether it's local or national news or even international news, you hear about it all the time. So terrorism is still a very big issue that we need to deal with in today's day and age. Also, the 5th season episode, The Outcast, if you think about it, that was the episode with the race that had only one gender. But then there were people who would come out and say they were male or they were female, and then they were ostracized by their community, and then they were forced to go through like restructuring, brain restructuring, or training to not be like perverted. And you see a lot of that still in today's fight for equality with LGBT. a lot of those things, and a lot of what's the transgender issues that are coming up now as well. So that's something that's still relevant from that episode. Also, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't care what anybody says, the special effects in The Next Generation are top-notch. I mean, I've always been a big fan of model work over CGI, and while CGI is pretty and everything, those models always look very real to me, and those effects in those shows were stunning. And to me, they still hold up 30 years later. So I just think that they're wonderful, and every time I watch them, I get a smile on my face. So that will take us up to the end of my discussion for the 30th anniversary of Next Generation. What I'd like to do now is go to what I like to call Open Channel. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the one comment that I did get on from YouTube about the last question. What did you think of the first episode of Star Trek Discovery? So Jonathan, my friend, wrote, and he said, overall I thought it was a pretty solid episode and the best pilot of any Trek series. Were there some incongruities? Absolutely. But I loved how the writers of the show decided they didn't need to have callbacks to previous Trek series in order to craft their new show. I'm also going to skip down to the lower part here. He says, because we're in a golden age of scripted television where serialized drama shows are now the norm, it is only natural for Star Trek to adopt this formula. You can no longer have the tried and true anomaly of the week formula and a thin overarching thread that loosely ties the season together. It just simply wouldn't work that way with TV dramas the way they're written today. Jonathan, I completely agree with you. TV has definitely changed. I still do feel I wish Discovery would have gone on board an Enterprise in the 25th century with the basic premise of Star Trek, just going out there exploring space. I'm not so sure exactly if Discovery is going to hold to that, but I'm certainly willing to see as the show progresses, and I'm getting really more and more interested in all these little twists and turns that are going on. So Jonathan, thank you very much for your comment. So that'll do it for today's episode. Your assignment for Open Channel for next week is, what are some of your memories of The Next Generation from the past 30 years? I'd love to hear it. Please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, please feel free to put comments down below. I'd love to read them. I'm going to try to do what I can to make sure that I read them on air. If you want to follow me on Facebook, my Facebook page is facebook.com/PGHTrekChat. You can also find me on Twitter at PGHTrekChat. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you next time, and until the next show, may yins live long and prosper.